Welcome to the channel, Echoes of the Ancient World. Today we will be discussing the Peloponnesian Wars, a series of the most famous and dramatic conflicts in ancient Greek history. But in order to understand how this happened, let's go back to the end of the First Greco-Persian War. In 479 BCE, the Greeks, united under the command of Athens and Sparta, defeated the Persians in the Battle of Plataea. This victory was a turning point in the history of ancient Greece and ensured its independence from the Persian threat. However, despite the unity in the struggle against a common enemy, Greece remained divided into many city-states, each of which sought leadership and influence in the region. For its time, the Peloponnesian War was not something sudden, and the roots of its causes go back to the previous decades. The Greek world of the 5th century BCE was at the peak of its cultural, political, and economic prosperity and power. In 490 BCE, the Greco-Persian Wars had ended, and the cities of Greece and their alliance in Asia Minor elected Athens, the richest and largest of the Greek cities and the abode of the oldest democratic traditions, as their political center. It was here that representatives from all over Greece gathered in the Hellenic League to report and resist the Persians, starting with the rebellion against the Persian rule of the Greek colonies. The confrontation soon spread to the Balkan Peninsula and lasted for 50 years, during which Athens gained a dominant position in the region, expanding its territorial influence and de facto taking control of the Delian League, one of the largest military and economic alliances of Greek city-states. Sparta, another major center of resistance against the Persian invasion, however, withdrew from the war as soon as mainland Greece had finally thrown off the eastern threat. It was not least the passivity of Sparta and its organized Peloponnesian League at the final stage of the war that led to the dominance of Athens, which took control of the Ionian colonies and islands surrounding Greece that previously belonged to the Persians. It was the Athenian strategies and policies that stood behind the most significant events of the confrontations with Persian King Darius I and later his son Xerxes I. Counterattacks in Asia Minor and the subsequent Egyptian expeditions were the final blow to the Greco-Persian Wars. Miltiades, Themistocles, Pericles, and Cimon are linked with victories in the decisive battles of the war, from the Battle of Marathon to the Battle of Plataea, along with other Athenian politicians and military leaders. The Persian Empire was forced to give up its conquest of Greek Polis and control over the Ionian colonies of the Greeks, but Athens' triumph led to a split in the Greek world. Not everyone was happy with the dominance and aggressive expansionist policies pursued in the first decades after the war. Athenian colonizers actively created economically dependent colonies, clericies, on the closest islands, pushing out existing cities and their inhabitants. The treasury of the Delian League moved from neutral Delos to Athens, and now Athens de facto became the financial center controlling the economy of the third Greek city-states. It is also worth noting the neighbors of Greece during this period. The Macedonian kingdom was not yet strong and mostly remained neutral, not showing much interest in Greek affairs, but Macedonian rulers were also concerned about the strengthening of Athenian presence in Thrace, which in the 5th century BC experienced active colonization by Athenian expeditions. The polis that depended on Athens also had control over the mountain ranges of Thessaly, where there were iron, silver, and copper mines. Byzantium, a Greek colony liberated from the Persians by the Athenian fleet, controlled strategically important straits that connected the trade routes of the Mediterranean and the Black Seas. Thus, the apparently independent trade of Pontic Greek colonies actually depended on the ambitions and moods of Athens. The half-century period after the Greco-Persian Wars made Athens the richest, most influential, and dangerous city-state in Greece, both politically and militarily. Of course, such a state of affairs did not suit many other major cities, but as long as the resentment did not cross the boundaries of silent disapproval of political statements and discussions, there was no conflict. The final escalation of relations between the Greek alliances began only at the end of the 5th century BC when Athens began to actively intervene in disputes and conflicts between cities of other alliances, seeking to lure more polis into the Delian League. Financial and military aid, bribery of governors and troops, and the blocking of trade with an unfavorable city were all methods used to exert pressure and promote their interests. The Boeotian, Phocian, Chalcidian, and large Peloponnesian cities split from the Delian League. Athens seized the opportunity during the war between the Peloponnesian League members, Megara and Corinth, in 459 BC, and formed an alliance with Megara. As a result, the Athenians gained a foothold on the Corinthian Isthmus and in the Corinthian Gulf, and their influence in Boeotia grew. This led to Sparta's entry into the war, and the so-called First Peloponnesian War began. During this war, Athens was forced to leave its mainland possessions outside Attica, including Megara and Boeotia, under Spartan control, but the important island of Aegina remained within the Athenian alliance. The 30 Years' Peace was concluded in the winter of 446 BC, which recognized the right of both states to control their own allies. In 433 BC, several events occurred that ultimately led to the most extensive war between Greek city-states in the history of classical Greece. Often, disputes and conflicts between individual city-states were actually confrontations between entire alliances, which were independent political entities. The city-states pursued their own foreign and domestic policies, and the same city could be part of several alliances at once. Membership in these alliances often required paying taxes to the common treasury, providing trade privileges to allied cities, and supplying military aid if necessary. On the other hand, the alliances allowed cities to use common trade goods and influence geopolitics through their representation at meetings of allied cities. Naturally, the alliances did not like it when any third party interfered in their internal affairs, especially if the intervention was overtly aggressive. Another contentious dispute broke out in 433 BC, this time between the city-states of the island of Corcyra and their ruling city, Corinth. The colonies wanted independence from their protector, and this dispute may have gone unnoticed if Athens had not joined the fight on the side of the rebels, in the best traditions of the struggle for democracy. This was followed by the conclusion of a defensive alliance with the city-states of Corcyra, which was naturally perceived by Corinth as interference in its internal affairs. Needless to say, Corcyra came out from under Corinthian control and essentially came under Athenian control, but this conflict with Corinth was only just beginning. In 431 BC, Athens began the siege of another Corinthian colony, Potidæa, which had close ties with the metropolis but was part of the Athenian naval alliance. After the events in Corcyra, Athens feared that Potidæa, under the influence of Corinth, might break away from the alliance, so they demanded the removal of Corinthian officials and the destruction of the city's walls facing the sea. In response, the Potidæans, incited by Corinth and Macedonia, announced their withdrawal from the alliance. The Corinthians, angered by Athens' actions in Corcyra, secretly sent a force to help Potidæa and requested assistance from Sparta. This was a direct violation of the peace treaty, which provided for mutual non-interference by the Athenian state and the Peloponnesian League in each other's internal affairs. In addition, Athens tried to expand its influence over other city-states. The incident with the Thebans became the final act in the tragicomedy called Greek Geopolitics in the year 430 BC. One of the cities of the Boeotian League wanted to leave its ranks. The city of Plataea, which had played a decisive and final role in the Greco-Persian Wars, leaned more towards the Athenian sphere of influence, and its citizens simply broke off all contractual relations with Thebes amid disagreements. The Thebans were not so much upset by the loss of an ally as by their departure into the Athenian sphere of influence. In that same year, a small force of Thebans suddenly burst into Plataea and occupied the central square to force the inhabitants to change their decision, but soon it became clear that this measure would not end well. The gates of the city closed, the citizens took up arms, and the Theban force found itself in a numerical minority, locked inside a well-fortified city. When the entire Theban army arrived, the city was already prepared for a siege, and the bold but reckless and outnumbered Theban force was captured. Athens sent aid to Plataea, and the Theban army was forced to retreat to avoid further escalation of the conflict. The climax of the unfolding events was the senseless bloody reprisal against all the Theban prisoners, and Plataea fully passed into the Athenian sphere of influence. A gathering of delegates from the Peloponnesian League took place in Sparta in 432 BC to deliberate on the concerns of the Greek city-states. Corinth, Megara, and some other states tried to persuade Sparta to start a war against Athens. The Athenians defended their hegemony, pointing to their moderation and the power of their state, and proposed not to violate the peace treaty. In the end, the allied envoys left the assembly, and the Spartans advocated cautious policies, proposing to act diplomatically by increasing the economic and military power of the alliance. However, the Ephors Phoenialids suggested immediately declaring war on Athens, and the assembly voted by majority to declare war. Athens was presented with several impossible ultimatums, and the war became inevitable.